Remove the wheel, 21mm socket. When you have a rusted vehicle like this, it's always good to pre-spray with penetrating spray all the parts that are going to come off, so there's no difficulty. Hopefully it goes a little smoother without any breakage. Just let that soak for a little bit. So the front sway bar link, if you need to replace it, go ahead. 17mm socket, and let's hope it comes off. If not, we're going to have to hold the back side of it. And that's what this little Allen head in here is for. I'm pretty sure if I put an Allen head in there, it's not going to work, but let's give it a shot. So I've got my Allen head socket in there, my 3/8 ratchet, 17mm wrench, and the idea of this is that you're supposed to be able to turn it and turn that nut off. And this is going to hold that stud. But look at, no, my Allen head socket's just going to break. So we're going to have to put a pair of locking pliers behind there. So I got some locking pliers on the back here holding that stud. Now you can just take the link and set it aside. I'm going to take off the ABS line and the bracket that holds the front flex hose on. I want to get those out of the way, then I'll take the main bolts out from the knuckle so that the strut can break free from the knuckle. And now I'm just going to use a trim tool to take the clip out for this ABS wire. Perfect. So 22mm socket and 22mm wrench. I like to put the socket on the nut side because sometimes these bolts have oblong to them or they're knurled in. So you just want to hold it to make sure it doesn't spin. Now you're going to notice that when these bolts come out, sometimes you might have to take a hammer. You can move it, wiggle them out. What you don't want is this knuckle popping straight out because you can pull the inner boot out. So if you need to at this point, get a bungee cord or something and you can wrap it around this caliper, bring it around over here and hook it so that it doesn't completely fall out. Let's go right there. Perfect. See how the control arm drops it down? And by this staying there, when I take that out, this doesn't fall forward. If it did, it would pull the actual CV shaft apart internally. So now we are at the top of the strut. We open the hood and you've got your strut towers on both sides. This happens to be the passenger side. And these nuts are 14mm wrench or socket. I really can't get a socket in here, so I'm just going to break this one free with a 14mm wrench, which I kind of already did before the camera rolled. So there we go. I'll break them free, and that way I can use like a little 1/4-inch ratchet and socket, and there won't be any pressure on it. I like to remove the most difficult ones first, and then this bolt and nut will actually support the strut up in the tower, so I can just do these by hand and get them out of the way, because then you have to hold the strut while you take that last nut off with one arm. So hear it? See it drop right through? So now you take your, I'm going to take my left arm, I'm going to support it, bring it right down. Just pay attention to the flex hose and that ABS wire. And there is your strut. So here we have our strut machine, because we're not doing a whole assembly, we're doing just the strut itself and a new strut cap. So I've got to set it up into the assembly here. I wouldn't expect you to have one at home, but you can always get those tools that have like the scissor fingers on them. I'm not a big fan of. They can be unsafe. If you cannot buy the assembly and you have to somehow do a strut, you want to do it yourself, work it with your local garage and see if you brought them the struts, if they would change them over for you. And that way you can reinstall them. You can install them back in your car and maybe go back to them for the alignment. It's a win-win. So now you're going to remove this rubber boot, and there is the nut that holds the spring together. Now we have to compress this spring. Don't just take that nut apart. Compress the spring so that we can undo that nut and there'll be no pressure on that. So what we want to do is bring the spring so that there's no pressure on the seat or on the cap. There we go. So now there's no pressure. I can take that nut off, take that strut out safely. 19mm socket. Watch your feet. Hold on to that base of that strut, and you can take this nut off. Now we can take up the old strut cap. As you can tell, look how rotted that is. It's pretty bad. And this piece right here that has the strut boot on it, if you can get a new one of these, I suggest it. Examine the spring, make sure that it's not cracked or broken, so you can reuse it. So here we have our new strut, and what you want to do with the new strut when it comes unassembled, you want to start it. So that means safely grab something padded, and you want to engage the center of the strut, the actual piston rod, 2 to 3 times. You want the gases to get mixed so that it actually will work. Now, you'll feel it when you do it yourself. The first initial push down goes down real easy, and that's because the gases haven't charged. If you don't do this, you will get a banging for the first couple 100 miles. So I personally like to avoid that, and guess what? It stops on some wear and tear internally. Now we're going to take the old rubber damper off the bottom of the old strut. And this is a factory strut. This has been in here for some time. But believe it or not, this thing is still in good shape. There's no tears. The drain hole's still good. I can line it right up. Drain hole over the drain hole. And this still has a little rubber pin. Put it right in that hole. No question, that's the way it goes. So now I'm going to take the top rubber, put it right back on that spring. It was stuck on the upper strut cap, which is broke, no good. And discarding it, and I'm putting a new one in. Look at the metal stuck behind. Let's get that out of there. Technically, if I had availability, I would put a new spring in this, only because it might have a couple of years left to it, but it's probably weak and doesn't have the proper height, right height. But it's not broken, so we're going to put this in. See the indent right there? You want to line that right up with the old indent of the spring. Perfect. Now the joust bumper, I'm just going to put that right on. And it's just going to fall down because it's old and it's worn out. I'm going to line this part up with the bottom part of the strut. The spring, I mean. Make sure it's snug and right in place. Now I'm going to install my new strut cap. This actually has a half moon guide on it. So the strut cap does come in 2 pieces. Came like this. So I'm just going to drop that down in there. And then I'm going to put the half moon. Line it up with that shaft. Start the actual new strut nut. Comes with the struts in the box. There you go. Now I can let that hang for a minute. So the new nut is the same size as the old one, 19mm. So this nut has a thread in it. It is threaded with a Teflon, so it will not back off. So I know that I've got that on there, so I'm happy. Now I'm going to decompress the spring, so I want it to seat strong. I don't like spinning that shaft in there. That's not really the way it's designed. So we can drop this down and get the tension of the spring so that we can tighten that. And it'll be properly tightened. The whole time you got to make sure that you get this to stay seated right where you want it to go. Just watch your hands. And this top will be able to spin, so don't worry about where the 3 mounting studs are. Here we go. Now I can feel the tension on that. Make sure everything's properly lined up. The top cap is lined up right. Now let's tighten it. Beautiful. Now I'm all set. I'm going to take it right out of the strut machine. Now we can just lift it right out of there. So because this does move freely, if you wish to now, you can try to line up the strut mount cap with the bolt and the way the bottom goes. But it won't matter because once this is bolted up, you can turn the bottom freely. I'm going to remove the new nuts, put them up there where I can reach them. Now we're going to guide this right through, paying attention to all the hoses and lines. Nice. So the new nuts are 15 millimeter wrench or socket. So I'm just going to go ahead and bottom these out and then torque them to the proper specs. So the upper shock mounts to the tower are 37 foot-pounds. Let's see if we can get in there on that back one. Oh wow, I did it. Nice. So now we've raised the vehicle back up and we're ready to put the knuckle into the bottom of the strut. So I'm going to leave the bungee cord there just in case my hands slip and I don't want to undo that CV shaft in there. So now you can obviously see the spring has dropped itself down. Usually you can be pretty strong enough to just lift it up and line it up. I'm going to put the bolts the same way I took them out. Once the one's in, it's easy after that. So with our 22 millimeter socket and wrench, the key here is that I want to get this camber to be as close as it was when I took it apart. And that would be pushed in as far as it can go. So I'm going to try to push at the same time and bottom this bolt out. I'm not going to reef on it because I am going to torque this to factory spec, which is 177 foot-pounds. So I just want to bottom it out. Same with the bottom. So now I'm going to undo my bungee cord. And I can put together my flex hose and my ABS line. This goes into that little slot. The new strut comes with it. That's perfect. See how the hose goes behind? It's like that for a reason. You don't want it in the front. You don't want to have a chance of this hitting the actual wheel or rim. And then this bracket went over the front of it to lock it into place. Okay, so I've got this flex hose bracket right in place. And this one has a hook on the top and the bottom. So you're going to hook the top in first, then slide the bottom in like that. And just start that nut by hand, bolt. So now I'm just going to take my 14 millimeter socket, just bottom these out. Nice and tight. Good to go. Now I can reinstall our front sway bar link. 17 millimeter socket. Beautiful. Now let's torque up our knuckle bolts to the strut. 177 foot-pounds for these strut bolts. Put the wheel on. Start your lug nuts by hand. Snug them down in the star pattern, or crisscross. And we'll lower it and torque it to factory specs. 21mm socket. Wheel torque is 76 foot-pounds. And you're going to tighten in a star pattern. Double check. So now with the strut assembly put on, all together, the wheel on, car on the ground, I'm going to torque this center nut. That was a 19mm socket. Factory wants 35 foot-pounds. Oh, I actually got about a quarter of a turn, so that goes to show you really should torque things. I'm just going to replace that rubber boot. There we go.